Hello everyone, and welcome back to Whispers of Turkish Stars. I hope your day is unfolding with warmth and a little sparkle, because today we're diving into a story that gently grips the heart and refuses to let go. Think of it as a soft lantern in a dark room, a reminder of what love can do when it's patient, brave, and stubborn enough to keep choosing the same person again and again. The theme is simple, yet immense. A love strong enough to unseat old fears, a love powerful enough to tear down walls. And at the center of it all are two names you know, two lives you've watched from a distance, Gökberk Yıldırım and Cemre Arda. On paper, they look like parallel lines. He grew into fame in a world that rewards perfection and punishes hesitation, the camera inching closer whenever it sensed a crack. She built her image quietly and carefully, a professional who never let the spotlight swallow her. But when you trace their steps back to the beginning, to the days before headlines and camera flashes, you find separate struggles that taught them how to survive. Before the glamour, there were calls that went unanswered, auditions that met silence, opportunities that vanished in the final hour. There were long nights for both of them, the kind that drag a person to the mirror and demand a tally of every flaw. Cemre learned early how to protect her tenderness. She crafted a graceful stillness, a way of moving through rooms without allowing strangers to touch what was delicate inside her. The armor wasn't loud, it was polite, composed, and almost translucent, like glass that looks fragile but doesn't break when tapped. Gökberk, for his part, learned to carry the weight of expectations that attached themselves to his name. If you looked quickly, you might have seen nothing but poise and easy charm. But the heaviest burdens often hide behind the quietest smiles, and his were heavy enough to leave small shadows under his eyes and small pauses in his voice. People say fate is random, but sometimes it seems almost intentional. Their first real crossing wasn't a fireworks moment. It was subtle, like two notes that find each other in a room full of noise and settle into a harmony that doesn't announce itself until you listen closely. It might have been a backstage hallway where a scheduled delay left them idling near the same door. It might have been a mutual friends gathering, where music drifted from a speaker and someone laughed too loudly in the next room. What mattered wasn't the place. What mattered was that their eyes met and something familiar flickered, the kind of recognition that makes you think, we've never met, but somehow I know the temperature of your silences. At first, they spoke in careful rhythms. She measured her words, he measured the spaces between his. Yet, even in caution, there was an invisible pull, a promise that grew stronger with each small exchange. He noticed how she listened, not to answer but to understand. She noticed how he looked past what she wore and what people said and saw the part of her that refused to bend. With every conversation, they pressed a fingertip to a hairline crack in the walls they'd each built and felt those thin lines widen, not with force, but with trust. The walls were real ones. There were emotional ones, formed by old injuries that taught them to expect withdrawal when they let someone too close. There were social ones, the unspoken lines that appear when success lifts you up and suddenly people assume you belong to the room more than to yourself. There were practical ones, calendars packed so tightly they squeaked, travel that upended plans, the odd loneliness that comes when strangers know your face but not your fear. And then there were the quiet prejudices, voices outside the frame suggesting who belonged with whom, what was her lane, what was his, what was too much or too little for a couple who dared to put tenderness above image. They didn't leap over those barriers in one miraculous moment. They chipped away, day after day, with kindness and persistence. They learned the tender architecture of each other's moods. He learned that on days when her smile looked too perfect, it meant she was tired of being brave and wanted to be seen without being asked to explain herself. She learned that when his voice softened to a hush, he wasn't bored. He was fighting past a wave of self-doubt that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with an old story he'd been told about what he had to be to deserve love. Communication became the bedrock, not the glossy kind that sounds good in quotes, but the slow, honest kind that requires patience. They didn't pretend they knew everything about each other. Instead, they allowed room for the unknown. There were nights when she spoke about childhood shadows, how quiet can be both sanctuary and prison. He didn't rush to solve it. He sat with her in the quiet, letting the room be soft and the minutes be long. There were mornings when he admitted he didn't always trust himself to be enough. She didn't offer platitudes, she offered presence, the steady truth of someone who won't leave when silence replaces sentences. They treated love as a verb. When her long-postponed project finally took shape, something she had dreamed of for years but tucked away because schedules and courage rarely aligned, he became the anchor that held the plan steady. He made space for the process, not just the result, and believed out loud for her on the days she needed an echo louder than her doubts. And when he faced a commitment that required stepping into a version of himself he had not yet embodied, she became his lighthouse. She reminded him of the steps he had already climbed and the storms he had already walked through. She was the person who said yes, you can, and whose yes sounded like a promise. Of course there were hard days. Love worth having will test you. Small misunderstandings swelled into distance more than once. A comment said in haste, a text left unanswered too long, a plan broken by something neither could control. These little fractures are where lesser bonds collapse. But instead of pretending perfection or keeping score, they returned to the table. They chose explanation over accusation, translation over assumption. They learned to speak in each other's languages without losing their own accents, to pause in the doorway of an argument and ask, what are we really afraid of right now? More than once, that question softened what might have hardened. Their admiration for each other was not performative. She saw in him a courage that had nothing to do with red carpets and everything to do with how he kept his heart gentle in a profession that sometimes rewards the opposite. He saw in her an indomitable spirit, the kind that bends to pick up others and somehow rises taller afterward. The longer they loved, the more their respect deepened. Admiration became the steady hum beneath their days, a supportive music that made even quiet afternoons feel important. Those who loved them took time to believe. Families and friends can be protective, that's their job. Some watched from a cautious distance, waiting to see if what flickered would become a flame or consume itself. But time has a way of revealing what is real. Observing the two of them lift, stretch, and evolve together, the skeptics gradually softened. They saw how laughter returned to both faces after difficult weeks, how neither tried to dim the other's shine to feel safer. Love like that wins people over. It whispers its proof daily rather than shouting it in a single moment, and slowly, support replaced hesitation. Their life together didn't stop being life. Projects flared and faded, headlines flattered, and then wandered off, and the phone sometimes lit up with messages that had more curiosity than kindness. Through it all, they kept returning to simple rituals. Morning coffee without cameras. A shared playlist that marked time through low-lit rooms and long drives. Notes left in places only they knew to look. And in the privacy no one else sees, they kept building a vocabulary that belonged only to them, a dictionary of gestures and glances that said we're in this, no matter what today tries to take from us. If you lean close to their story, you hear a handful of lessons that anyone can carry away. Empathy is not an accessory, it's an essential. You can't love someone well without being willing to sit in their shoes long enough to feel where they pinch. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's the doorway. The bravest thing they did was reveal the tender parts that seemed most unpresentable and then watch those parts be received with care. Patience is not passive, it's an active calm. They cultivated it the way you water a plant that doesn't bloom on command. And unconditional support is not a slogan. It's a practice that includes the late-night ride across town and the quiet applause when a private fear finally loosens its grip. What makes their love worthy of retelling isn't grand spectacle. It's the steady demolition of barriers that once seemed immovable. Every fear turned into an invitation. Every difference became a bridge. Even setbacks were reworked into foundations, the way a builder uses old stone to support a new room. Slowly, the walls that once defined their limits became the ground upon which they built a home for their shared life, a spacious place where both could remain distinctly themselves and still belong fully together. This is the kind of story that reminds us of what love is supposed to be, not an escape from reality, but the courage to face reality hand in hand. You look at them and understand that admiration is not the same as idealization, that intimacy isn't built by spectacle but by small, consistent truth. Their achievements didn't have to compete, their identities didn't have to shrink to fit. Instead, their union worked like a lens that brought each of their best qualities into focus and softened what was harsh without erasing anything essential. So when we talk about a love that tears down walls, it isn't a metaphor for their audience. It's a daily fact, humble and continuous, built out of apologies that arrive without bargaining, promises that are kept without needing to be reminded, and quiet sharing that continues even when the lights are off and the room is empty. It's the patient work of two people who have learned that real safety is not found in building higher defenses but in dismantling them and standing in the open with someone who will not run. If you've been with us through this journey, you already understand the shape of what their story offers to anyone listening. It says begin where you are, not where your pride says you should be. It says choose conversation even when your pulse is loud and your throat is tight. It says remember that behind every public life is a private courage that deserves tenderness. And it says love, when tended with attention and honesty, does not weaken in the storm. It finds its footing and becomes the shelter both of you were looking for from the start. As we close, let's leave the spotlight on what matters. Today we followed the arc of Gökberk, Yıldırım and Cemre, Arda, watched how their meeting bloomed into a partnership that disarmed cynicism, and traced the way clear communication, real empathy, and steady admiration became their unbreakable foundation. Their story doesn't claim perfection, it offers proof. Proof that connection can be rebuilt after a hard day. Proof that success doesn't need to cost closeness. Proof that love, at its bravest, redraws maps and removes limits, until the impossible looks like a door that has been open all along. If a part of their path reflects your own, tell us what you felt. If you stood before a wall you thought you could not cross, share the way you found a foothold. Your experiences matter here. This community grows stronger when your voice joins the chorus. And if this tale gave you a breath of courage, let it show in the simplest ways. Offer it to a friend who needs it, keep it close for the next hard night, and remember that you are allowed to ask for the kind of love that holds you without smothering you, that challenges you without diminishing you, that listens until you recognize yourself again. Thank you for spending this time with us and for welcoming stories that feed the heart. If you want more journeys like this one, you know where to find us. Subscribe to Whispers of Turkish Stars, ring that bell so the next chapter reaches you the moment it begins, and come back soon. There is always another story worthy of your attention, another reminder that love is steady, attentive, and brave, can do what people once said could not be done. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves, and let love keep the path lit ahead of you.